Shabbat Shalom. 2 weeks ago, a particularly graphic photo was published on the front page of the New York Times. 4 lay dead on the street having tried to flee Ukraine. The first thing one notices about the photograph is the children. The boy with his bright blue jacket still wearing his turquoise and black backpack. And the girl in her pink winter coat, clutching what appears to be a purse in her hands. The 2 children lay next to their mother, whose single rollaway suitcase still rests so gingerly upon her hands. The man, later discovered to be a church volunteer, lay on the other side, his face and hands bloodied from the attack. The father of this family, Serhiy Parabinis, was not in town at the time. He had been in eastern Ukraine caring for his ailing mother. He had spoken to his wife the night before and told her to be careful. She said, "Don't worry, we'll be fine." Serhiy didn't know that they were not fine until he checked his social media and saw the picture on his Twitter feed. Can you even imagine? Almost immediately, Serhiy recognized the luggage, and then, of course, his children and wife. And that is how he discovered his family was gone. As I was reading this week's Torah portion, Shmini, I couldn't stop thinking of Serhiy and his family and the gaping sense of loss he must feel in the aftermath of their sudden and violent deaths. The grisly picture of his children and wife dead on the street stayed with me as I read our portion's story of tragic and sudden death, the heartbreaking tale of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu. For those who may not be familiar, Nadav and Avihu were priests who took it upon themselves to offer what was deemed, quote, alien fire to God. God was deeply offended by this offering that was not enjoined upon them, not enjoined upon these 2 brothers. And so the text tells us a fire came forth from Adonai and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of Adonai. Shock doesn't begin to describe the sentiment around their deaths. The story of Nadav and Avihu is more than tragic. It's terrifying. These brothers were full of promise and potential. As scholar Blue Greenberg writes, they were outstanding young men, deemed worthy of ascending Mount Sinai and participating in the meal when God's face was shown. Nadav and Avihu were leaders, elevated among their community, and they were men of faith who had devoted their lives to serving God and the people Israel. These 2 were role models and achievers of the highest order. Processing the deaths of Nadav and Avihu has been the work of countless commentators and scholars, all of whom have pored over the agonizing mystery of this moment. But tonight we do not focus on the whys of this horrific scene, but rather the whats. What might this challenging tale impart to us? What might its purpose be in the Torah that we all receive? Of course, mining this text is difficult because this story, especially upon first blush, feels so unjust, so cruel. But then again, it pulses with a visceral kind of emotion that is unusual in our Torah and therefore draws us in. For the truth is, as outlandish as this story may be, At its core, it's all too real in its depiction of life's harrowing unpredictabilities. And so we come to the first lesson of this mournful tale, and that is the experience of loss is universal. Sorrow and pain know no cultural or economic or temporal bounds. Thus, generations of readers have been captivated by this text because we know the pain associated with gut-wrenching loss, unexpected or otherwise. And we know the pain that stems from fatal circumstances we simply cannot control or comprehend. And we know that the boundaries between life and death are often inscrutable, frequently leaving us as perplexed as we are heartbroken. Ironically, it is the emotional brutality of this scene that grounds the Torah in the truth of human experience. The Torah does not shy away from the messiness of life or death, nor does it ignore life's exquisite fragility. Moving ahead, we see the Torah addresses the emotional cataclysm so many face after death in the portrayal of Aaron, father of Nadav and Avihu. Though the text only offers 2 words to describe Aaron's grief, Vayidom Aharon, meaning Aaron was silent. His silence in the face of this unspeakable tragedy speaks volumes. As Rabbi Kenneth Weiss of blessed memory taught, the verb used to describe Aaron's silence, vayidom, implies something deeper. It suggests rather one who is destroyed or cut off. And to be sure, Aaron must feel both, destroyed by the cruelties of fate and cut off from the life he once knew. His grief is not concealed, nor is his suffering withheld. Therefore, the second lesson we yield from this text is that there is no shame in mourning, no indignity in grief. Recall that Aaron is second in charge to Moses. He is a leader of the Israelite people. He is the high priest, and yet here we see him at his most vulnerable, broken by loss, devastated by the death of his 2 beloved boys. And Aaron, known for his public speaking prowess and for acting as the spokesperson for Moses, is now silent, muted by unfathomable grief. It is a powerful contrast with a critical message. No one is immune to grief, and no one, no matter their social standing or position, should be expected to obscure their grief. Public displays of sorrow do not brand us as weak, nor do they mark us as unfit or maladapted. Aaron shows us as much through his sorrow and then through his ultimate return to life and work and service. To witness Aaron lose himself in the wake of this tragedy affirms our own struggles with death and loss. His work suffers, as does the work of his remaining sons. His fuse is short. He is impulsive and erratic. How could he be anything else in this moment? Moses, too, sees how Aaron is struggling. And though he does not indulge Aaron's sorrow at first, he does change his tune later. When Aaron cries out to Moses so clearly in pain, saying, "See, this day such things have befallen me. Had I eaten the sin offering today, would Adonai have approved?" Moses stops to listen. Hearing Aaron's words, among the first he had spoken since his boys' deaths, Moses, quote, approved, meaning he finally understood. He understood how disoriented Aaron felt, how unmoored his life had become, how irreparably damaged his heart truly was. And Moses now understood that the only response he need offer Aaron was one of love, validation, and care. And so is revealed the third lesson of this story, the necessity of answering pain with empathy and meeting loss with compassion. When I think about Serhiy, the Ukrainian father in mourning, I wonder, what will he do? Where will he go? We know there are many Serhiy's, so many who've lost their families and dear ones in this horrific conflict. Some have had the luxury of grieving, but others, due to the terrors of war and the urgency of fleeing, have not. But the grief will come, and the world will need to help our Ukrainian brothers and sisters to heal. There will be those who stay in a battered and bruised Ukraine, and there will be, well, there are already, millions of refugees among us. They will need our help, our resources, our aid, of course, but they will need our emotional support as well. For these shattered humans will need to grieve, and we will need to make space for that overwhelming grief, to affirm the pain of losing loved ones, of losing home, of losing identity. And we, like Moses, will need to answer their pain with empathy, their loss with compassion and care. May we open our hearts in this moment of violence and war to welcome the stranger, to share our bread, and to comfort those now wandering in the wilderness. Ken Yehi Ratzon.